First of all, just a light question for you. How much fun do you think this Clemson versus LSU game is going to be? You think that it's going to be one of the best that you've ever watched?
Well, there's definitely a good possibility it could be that way, right? If both of these offenses are playing up to their highest level, this could be an all-timer, right? It could be 49-46 or something like that. I just think that Clemson defense is going to find a way to slow Burrow down enough, hold him to a couple of field goals, maybe even get a pick or two. But I don't know, man. I'm not trying to be negative. You know, when games get hyped like this, I mean, just think about where we were this time last year, right? We're talking about Alabama being the greatest Alabama team of all time, maybe the greatest college football team of all time. Everyone was talking about this epic game that was about to happen. And unless you were a Clemson fan, it was a beatdown. It was not a great game. I don't foresee beatdown next Monday, but it's pretty rare that these games live up to their expectations.
That is true. You know, we've seen a lot of times where it's been a blowout, or I mean, even Clemson's game. You know, that was unexpected, but 28-point win is not something you really want to see. You really want to see what more like Clemson versus Alabama 35-31, or Clemson versus Ohio State, where it was a 6-point win there. You really want to see more of that instead of a big blowout. Going back to the national championship coming up this Wednesday, or this coming Monday on the 13th. Everybody's saying, well, it's going to be a pro LSU crowd. It's going to be a home game for LSU. Do you think that's a factor for Clemson at all?
I think the fact that it's in a dome and the Clemson fans will be outnumbered because it is in LSU's backyard, I think that could have an impact, right? I mean, that Superdome gets really loud, could move the needle on it. You know, anytime that you're playing these college games indoors, and I know you see incredible noise. I mean, Clemson's been down to Texas A&M. I was at that game. It's one of the loudest stadiums I've ever been in. They've been to Auburn, you know, obviously playing in Death Valley. It just feels a little bit different sometimes in those domes. So it concerns me always a little bit when these college teams are going in there and it's not something that they're used to. But from a crowd perspective, I think it just plays into Dabo's narrative, right? Nobody thinks we can win. What are we seeing? Like 95% of the money in Vegas is on LSU right now with the points, right? Anytime you turn on the TV, anytime you turn on ESPN on the radio or anything like that, it's all about Joe Burrow. It's all about LSU. It's all about Ed Orgeron and destiny season, going to win it at home, especially now with the Saints going down, right? Oh, they were going to win one from Louisiana now because the Saints got eliminated on a pass interference. I just think every box that you're checking that could be a negative for Clemson, I just think fuels the beast up even more. I think it helps them, to be honest with you.
Do you feel like the Fiesta Bowl may have taken too much out of the Tigers?
You know what? If it would have been the same schedule as last year, where you did not have the 2-week break in between, you know, you would have only had the 9 days, I guess, from a Saturday semifinal to a Monday night championship game, I think it could have an impact. I'm not hearing anything about long-lasting injuries. You know, we know T. Higgins was banged up. We know Justin Ross. I mean, heck, you know, I remember hearing Skalski walking off the field saying it's, you know, I'm battered and bruised, man, but you know, we live to fight another day. Unless there's lingering injuries, I just can't imagine with that kind of break. I mean, think about, you're essentially having a bye week in between, right? And Clemson had the benefit of having 2 bye weeks during the regular season. I don't think it took too much out of them. I mean, you could argue it up one side and down the other, right? I mean, could you say, hey, LSU coasted. They didn't have to really expend a whole lot of effort or energy or emotion, so they're going to be more prepared? Or could you say, hey, man, Clemson survived, right? I mean, if you're going to win a national championship game or a national championship, you've got to find a way just in general to win one maybe that you shouldn't, or win that super close game that maybe you shouldn't. Clemson getting that out of the way now, you could argue it that it works in that direction. But from a health perspective and being banged up perspective, I don't think that's going to be an issue.
What would you be worried about the most? We hope they don't watch this video. We hope they don't check out this clip. But if you're Clemson, what's the one thing that you're I wouldn't say scared, but just worried about?
So I'll tell you what I'm not worried about, right? I mean, I'm guessing, and especially with Burrow playing so late into all these games, I just don't really think there's any wrinkles that LSU's been saving or hiding up until now. So I feel like that gives Venables and everybody a chance to scheme against them. The one thing I'm worried about, and I don't even like putting it out there in the air, is turnovers, right? I mean, Clemson has played almost perfect, mistake-free football on the offensive side for the most part for, 7-8 games in a row. I mean, Trevor Lawrence has been Hasn't thrown an interception since Louisville in the first half of the Louisville game. And the Clemson running backs haven't been putting the ball on the carpet much either. Or I guess Justin Ross, could you argue if he fumbled? I don't know. But turnovers is the one thing that worries me, is that your number's going to come up at some point, right? And this Clemson team is putting up historically great plus-minus numbers in the turnover column. It's got to end at some point. Now, maybe it ends in 2020, in week 2 against whoever Clemson's playing next year. But that would be my concern, is especially if Clemson turned the ball over a couple of times early and had to chase LSU. You do not want to be in the scenario where you've got to get desperate to stop them or get 2 scores down to LSU and feel like you've got to just throw the ball all over the lot. If this becomes a shootout, one of those 45, 48, 51-point games, that's the game I think that Clemson loses. It's a 20, 25-point game, 30, 35 in that range. Those are the games that I think Clemson wins all day long, and I think they'll do it again this week. I mean, I think it's going to be something like 33-24, something like that. Tigers of Clemson, not of LSU. But the turnovers is the one thing that bothers me.
Yeah, so kind of on the flip side of that coin, what's something LSU should be worried about when the Tigers have the ball?
I think LSU needs to worry about how you can get Clemson off the field, right? And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. They haven't really stopped anybody all season. And if you listen to LSU fans and you listen to ESPN, I know they've had a couple of injuries on defense, right? And you've got some of those guys back. But when you look back at the Ole Miss game where Ole Miss carved them for over 400 yards rushing, right? I mean, look at what Vanderbilt scored 35-plus points against them. I mean, they never really stopped Alabama that entire game when they played Alabama, including big play after big play. And they don't have a lot of different bodies out there now. So the one thing that we're not hearing a ton about, because you're just getting lost in this haze of Joe Burrow is he the greatest ever, is that Clemson offense, I think, is just about as good as LSU, but it's not all throwing the football. It's not one-dimensional. You've got Travis Etienne, and you've got the ability to do it both in the air and on the ground. So I think LSU would be worried about stopping Clemson, but more importantly, can we stop them on our terms, right? I mean, an 11-play drive with 9 Travis Etienne or Trevor Lawrence runs, to me, would almost excite me more, a week from tonight than 2 quick 35-yard pass plays for a touchdown. Grind that clock, grind that running game. That's got to be what LSU's afraid of in my mind.
Mark, like you were talking about, having Brent Venables trying to slow down this LSU offense and maybe get a couple of picks, something like that. Something Joe Burrow has not done really this year. It's thrown a lot of interceptions. Look, it's easy to see that when you look at this on paper, how are you going to stop this team? They seem like an absolute juggernaut on offense. And of course, Clemson is pretty much the same way, but Joe Burrow has been on an absolute another level, of course, winning the Heisman Trophy. There's a lot of talk about the inverted Tampa 2 defense that, Clemson kind of brought out against Ohio State. It's an interesting defense as well. How do you kind of see this Clemson defense attacking the LSU offense? What do you think they're going to do to slow them down?
Well, there's a couple of angles to that, right? So number one, inverted Tampa 2 defense. Yes. Auburn had some success, essentially dropping 8 guys, right? And sometimes only rushing 2 defensive linemen and a linebacker. And they held LSU really in check for the majority of the game, kept LSU below 30 points. And that Venables has got to be looking at doing some of those things. I'll tell you, man, I was watching one of the NFL games this weekend, and I don't think we'll see it to this degree. But as we were watching it, I was talking to my son Faxon, and I'm like, I bet we see the Tigers do a lot of this on Monday night next week against LSU. And I'm talking about the Tennessee Titans against the New England Patriots. The Titans ran that football into the ground and kept Tom Brady off the field, right? That's how you win these playoff games in the NFL. I'm not saying you're going to see it to the same degree as you've seen it, but I just wonder if Clemson will really focus on that run game with ETN, and of course now Trevor Lawrence is running like Lamar Jackson these days. Between ETN and Lawrence and Lynn J. Dixon, I wonder if we're really going to focus on that running game and trying to grind out some drives, especially in the first half, to really start wearing LSU down, and most importantly, keep that offense off the field, right? So that's not really what are you going to do on defense, but if you could limit Burrow and instead of having 12 possessions in the game, having 9, just because you've really run that clock and grinded on the LSU defense, I think that could be the biggest favor that you could do for Brent Venables.
Yeah, and I like the way you say about running the football as well, because when I look at the LSU defense, they have two stud cornerbacks, 5-star guys. They have a stud safety. They have one really good 5-star linebacker. Their defensive line is stacked with a bunch of 4-star guys, but a lot of them are really big, way over 300 pounds. Really big, really tall guys. And I'm thinking, I don't see the speed like I saw with Ohio State. I'd like to see Travis Etienne and what he can do getting to the outside on running, getting to the outside off tackle, to the left, to the right. Ohio State, yes, Chase Young was kind of taken out of the game. He didn't have a big stat line, but he sat in front of Jackson Carman for the majority of the game, and Clemson could not run to the left. Now, when you look at the past games, Clemson struggles typically running to the right, and they are very successful running behind Carman and Simpson. Now, you put Young over there, and that hurt their ability to do that. I don't think LSU has that ability to do that, just like Ohio State did. I think Clemson will be able to take advantage of that. And on the flip side, too, if you look at it, I'm hearing people say that, well, if Clemson did exactly what they did against Ohio State, they're not going to win. I would say I question that as well, because Trevor Lawrence is a great runner. I mean, you saw him outrun, like William Qualkenbush said, you saw him outrun 5-star linebackers on the Ohio State defensive side of the ball. Even Tony Elliott was like, man, I was just hoping he wouldn't check up. I felt like Trevor was thinking he wasn't fast enough and he might have went out of bounds. And then when I realized he had turned his hips and he was going and he high-stepped a little bit, but he didn't even really need to high-step. He was enough ahead of those guys to get right into the end zone without even high-stepping. And that speaks to his speed. I mean, we've seen times where I can't remember what game it was. I know you're going to beat me up in chat about this, but remember I believe it was the Pittsburgh. Yeah, I know what it was. It was the Pittsburgh ACC championship game when they handed it off, I believe the first play of the game to Etienne, and then Lawrence catches up to him by the end of it and beats him to the end zone or passes the end zone at the same time. And that was when a lot of fans, including myself, were like, oh man, Trevor Lawrence has some wheels on him. So I think, Clemson can win the same way that they won against Ohio State. If Ohio State couldn't stop Lawrence running and Etienne catching, I don't think LSU will be able to stop it. You got to have linebackers that can stop Etienne. I don't see it. Defensive line, I see Travis Etienne doing well, going off tackle, like I said. Again, we're talking to Mark Childress on the Morgan Thomas Show with Big Al over on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Periscope, anywhere you check out podcasts as well. And we're getting ready to wrap it up, Mark, but I got some questions over from YouTube that people really want to ask you. And they feel like that a couple of fans are saying that, do you agree that it's weird or it's interesting that LSU's defense seemed to be an average defense, and now all of a sudden at the end of the game or at the end of the year against Clemson, they're elite and Clemson's going to struggle? Are you buying that they're elite, or do you feel like they have improved? I know a lot of articles I've read saying that you can't go by the way they played, at the beginning of the season or the middle of the season because they've completely adjusted and now they're a top level defense.
Well, they're not a top level defense. They have been playing better in recent weeks, but let's look who they stopped, right? I mean, they shut down a Georgia team that is just an awful offensive team, right? And Oklahoma's been great this season, but Oklahoma was not great in the game against LSU. And I think some of that was what LSU did on defense. Also just felt like it was some weird play calling, and Jalen Hurts did not look good and looked shaky from the absolute start in there. So what are they? I mean, the numbers don't lie at the end of the day, right? Clemson's top 1, top 2, top 3 defense in the country, and LSU's coming in somewhere between 25 and 30. That's about what they are. They're not suddenly going to come in. I mean, nobody has shut down Clemson in the last 10 weeks, and LSU's not going to suddenly do it this coming up on Monday night.